Stu, what are you doing? It's not even Sunday. Doesn't matter. Krush Dev Diary. I actually have 2 changelogs in front of me this week, but unfortunately, a lot of my changes have been tweaks, bug fixes, and interior stuff. So there's not really a lot of obvious stuff that's different. I think it's good to focus on the interior from time to time, though. It's, definitely good to fix bugs. But, just the tuning and the tweaking and some of the preparatory work is quite valuable down the line. So that's what I've been doing. I'm itching to change the bulldozer sprite because it looks kind of out of place and it definitely needs a rework. But that will come eventually. I maybe need to do some concept art for it. Anyway, first on the change list, fixed Hell Deadly Walls bug. Yes, Hell has deadly walls because it's supposed to be hellish. You touch the sides in Hell, that's it, you're done. But unfortunately, Hell turns deadly walls on, but it didn't turn them off again. So when you started a new game, the walls were still deadly. That's been fixed. Next up, balance change. Toned down repulsive phase. Yes, repulsive phase is funny, but it's also quite frustrating. I found quite often you would lose a chain through no fault of your own, really. And so I toned it down, just to tone down the frustration. In a similar fashion, I changed blind phase, which strips all of the arrows and all of the HUD elements away completely. I like the idea behind it, but again, not knowing where the targets were can be quite frustrating. So what I did is I add 3 bonus targets. So if you've only got 1 on the field, there are now 4 on the field, which means you've got a much better chance of being able to sustain a chain. At the end of the phase, 2 of the 3 added targets are removed, so you've got a net gain of 1. So it kind of acts like an extra target phase, but there is an elevated risk of losing your chain. I kind of like the idea of some of the negative phases having a hidden positive effect. The idea being, if you can endure a couple of bad rolls and a spate of bad luck, then you might be better equipped to deal with prosperity later on in the same run. It's food for thought anyway, but the randomness sometimes can be, I think, a little bit too much. Sometimes you get dealt a bad hand and there's no chance of being able to get a decent score as a result. So one thing I did to redress that was to add a target floor. So for the first minute, there's a minimum of 1 target. For the second minute, i.e. from 1 minute to 2 minutes, there's a minimum of 2 targets, and so on and so forth. All in, I think this makes for a fairer progression, even if it can mean that late phase there might be a few too many targets on the field. But, again, that can be tuned. We can reduce the probability of extra target phases appearing, and so kind of find a balance, if you like. I've got to say, though, I don't mind it when there's a few targets on the field, because it does give you a lot of options, and the chance for some big multipliers. Next up on the change list, extra target in dark mode. Again, dark mode cuts your sight radius, so getting an extra target in there just makes it a little bit fairer, means that if, as long as you're good, you're not going to lose your chain of your own accord, unless you're very unlucky. Next change, I prevented double phases. These were relatively unnoticed until I added the phase wipe. But as soon as I added that, it was pretty obvious that phases were coming up twice in a row. So I changed it. Now if you get the same phase rolled twice in a row, it will re-roll. Definitely a positive thing. Makes for more varied games, which is only a good thing. Next up, slightly bigger targets in Endgame. Yeah, the targets get smaller and smaller, but in my opinion, I think it was getting a little bit too hard to hit them. I mean, you got the bulldozer bearing down on you fast, so I think it became almost pointless going for targets. It was really more about just surviving and getting the occasional target where you could. So by making the targets slightly bigger and easier to hit, it does kind of keep the chain and target acquisition still relevant until later on. Okay, next up, reduced engine cutout time by 10 frames. I think it was 100 frames before, it's 90 frames now. Actually, that's not frames, that's frame equivalents. It's scaled by time scale now, but 60 frames a second, so 90 frames is a second and a half. When you crash and stall, you're out for that length of time. It's a minor tune, but I don't want every crash to be a death sentence. I want there sometimes to be a frantic escape as your engine turns over and you zoom off just as the bulldozer arrives. The final thing on my first of the 2 changelogs I have here is a pretty major internal thing. Simply says permitted plural colours. Basically what that means is now a phase can have more than just a single colour. It can have 1 colour, it can have 2 colours, it can have N colours. And the game tracks them all, and it also interpolates between them rather seamlessly. That's where most of my work has gone in the last couple of dev days, and, well, I hate to say it, it's something that doesn't really show up too much. There is one new phase that uses these fancy new effects. You'll see it, maybe. It uses a colour gradient. But anyway, let's get on to the second changelog. First up, I've added an icon. Yes, Krush now has an icon. I'm not going to show it to you, because it's pretty boring. It's just a K, that's all it is. I also fixed the application window name, because it turns out I was setting it, but I was setting it after the GL window had been initialized, which meant that it didn't take effect. So now it says Krush instead of STL app, which is nice. Next up, I added a fade in from black at the start of a game. It's pretty quick and it's pretty subtle, but on a frame-by-frame basis, it's a lot neater than what used to happen. Also, what have we got? We have support for patterned arenas. Now that we can specify multiple colours, I can also specify patterns for those colours to be arranged. So, these aren't used yet, and I'll probably use them sparingly. We can have horizontally striped arenas, vertically striped arenas. We can have checkerboard arenas. Fancy. Now, before you panic, I am not planning on having garishly coloured arenas. What this lets me do is have 2 complementary or very close colours that can just serve as a way to give an arena texture and more personality. You know, it doesn't have to be garish or anything like that. I mean, it could be garish. I could have, a brightly coloured magenta and bright green phase and burn everyone's retinas out. I could do that. I might do that, but that's not the intent. It's the idea is to have a much subtler appearance. And in fact, I plan to recolour most of the phases at some point, because I just pick the colours randomly. I mean, most of them are just pure colours. And next up, I did some fancy trickery to smooth the transition between different patterns. Now, the actual phase pattern is kind of a discrete change. So if we go from horizontal stripes to vertical stripes, it's difficult to sort of meld between those. So what I do is in the last, I think, 40 to 50 frames of a phase, what I do is I fade out the first pattern to the base colour, and then the base colour will fade in with the new pattern. So it's utterly smooth, but it's kind of a trick. Just to sort of to chamfer off the edges of having different patterns come in. So that was a necessary tweak, just, so things look proper. What else? What next? Oh, I did some work on my colour object to calculate gradients. Because it's all very well and good to have stripes. Stripes are easy, you just colour 1, colour 2, colour 1, colour 2. But for gradients, you need to calculate colour 1.43, for instance. So I expanded my colour class just to, facilitate that. I did have some performance worries about calculating it for every tile in real time, but it turns out that it's not really a problem. I think I will cache it in the future. I can if I'm doing like a horizontal gradient, I can do it by column, for instance. For a vertical gradient, I can do it by row, because they all change in union. I don't necessarily need to work it out for every single visible tile. So I think that's an optimization I'll make in the future. But to be perfectly honest, my performance worries were unfounded because it works perfectly smoothly. I'm still stuck in a 16-bit mindset where every operation is incredibly valuable and you had to cut down things to an absolute minimum. The original Crusher was interpreted and ran on a 7 MHz machine. So I'm not really used to having this massive overhead. But all the same, I probably will make these optimizations in the future because, why not? So anyway, yes, gradients. Gradients are now supported. So I can now have either horizontal or vertical gradients. And I may expand this to gradients of any angle, so I can have, 45 degrees, 30 degrees, whatever, I may also expand this to multicolour, N-colour gradients, just to give me a bit more flexibility. In addition to having multicolour walls with the gradients, I also changed the arena wall rendering so that the walls now match the colour of the gradient, which is quite nice. And the very last thing on my list is a new phase called Many Targets, No Respawn, and I think it's coming up soon. Basically what it does is it spawns 50 targets, there it is, You notice it's slate grey at the top and ruby red at the bottom. It's quite nice, isn't it? It just gives me, it's like more flexible colouring. Now I can have greater differentiation than just pure colours. But the targets don't respawn. Unfortunately, there is a bug. The end of phase logic does reset the respawn delay, but unfortunately, any targets that respawn during the phase, they kind of get placed in limbo for a respawn counter, which means they don't respawn for a little while, which means, yeah, well, obviously I lost my chain on this run. There it is! You see, they come back after a delay. It's a finite delay, thankfully. But yeah, need to fix that. That's on the list, though, that's fine. Anyway, that's all I've got. Loads of balance changes, and some fundamental changes to the way colours are handled. Not fully reflected in the visuals quite yet, but over the coming weeks I'll start to get a bit more creative with the phases, I think. So what's next? Bulldozer Sprite, I think. It's a big thing to tackle, though. Next session, I probably will make a start on it. So, thank you very much for watching, and until next week, or a week and a half or so, farewell.